Howdy! I'm just so proud to be here. I am as country as cornbread. Would you believe I live so far back out in the country that all the farmers have to drive toward town to hunt? Well, I'm glad to be with you today to share a few things. I tell you, I'm just as country as a goose and a gander. Well, none of us know the difference between a goose and a gander, but we don't worry about that any. We just put them all together and let them figure that out. Not too long ago, I happened to see the preacher. I said, "Hello, preacher." I says, "I know what you're going to preach on Sunday." He said, "Oh, you do?" I said, "I sure do." He said, "Well, what am I going to preach on?" And I said, "On the platform." A while back, we had a wonderful revival at church, and I was able to attend all the services. On the very last night, the preacher said since I had been so faithful about coming to all the services, he said I could go ahead and pick out all the hymns. I said, "Sir?" He said, "Go ahead, pick out all the hymns." I said, "Oh, goody, I want him and him and him." You should have seen the look on that preacher's face. I think he was as confused as a termite in a yo-yo. But anyhow, one of those hymns invited me to go out for lunch. He said he'd take me for a long lunch. He took me down to Pudgy's and bought me a foot-long hot dog. Well, you know, I really didn't know what his name was. And I thought, oh dear, how will I know? How can I find out what his name is? I thought, I know. All I need to see is his driver's license, and that would tell me his name. So I said, "By the way, have you got any ID?" And he said, "About what?" Well, we had a nice time, and afterwards, he gave me this great big hug and this great big kiss. I said, "Woo-wee, where in the world did you learn to kiss like that?" And he said, "Siphoning gas." Not too long ago, Cousin Rosemary came for a visit, and she confided in me that she was looking for a husband. I said, "Cousin Rosemary, you better leave those husbands alone and go find you a single man." Well, the next thing I knew, she sashayed up to this man and she said, "Hi there, you look like my fourth husband." And he said, "Fourth husband? Lady, how many times have you been married?" And she said, "3." Now, we're kind of proud of Uncle Rufus. Not too long ago, he got a promotion. Now Uncle Rufus is over 55 people. He mows grass at the cemetery. You know, I hope when my time comes, I hope that I go real peaceful in my sleep. Not yelling and screaming like all those other passengers in Uncle Schaffner's car. But I really am real good and healthy. I try to eat right and do right, live right. And so I had my checkup at the doctor, and I was expecting a good report. And he came in the room and he said, "Minnie, you need 3 bypasses." I said, 3 bypasses? Doctor, what are you talking about? He said, "You listen to me. You need 3 bypasses. You need to bypass Hardee's, Wendy's, and McDonald's." Now, Bubba is our town character. I guess every town has one. Well, Bubba, not too long ago, went to the hardware store, and the clerk said, "May I help you?" And old Bubba said, "You sure can. I want some 2x4s. And the clerk said, "Okay. How long would you like them?" And Bubba said, "Oh, I want them a long time because I'm building a house." That Bubba is so bald-headed. He's getting so bald, and I understand he puts a chalk mark up on his forehead so he'll know how far to wash his face up. He went to the barber to get a haircut, sat in the seat and told the barber he wanted a haircut. And the barber finished, and Bubba said, "How much do I owe you?" And the barber said, "You owe me $1 for the haircut and $9 for the finder's fee." Bubba's wife is a real happy person. Every time you see her, she's real cheerful and so pleasant. And I asked her one time, I said, "Do you ever wake up grumpy?" And she said, "Oh, no, I let him sleep." Now, Uncle Wade happened to be, he told me not too long ago that Aunt Mattie Lou was getting pretty sick. And he told me that he called the Methodist preacher to come and pray for her to get well. And I said, "You call the Methodist preacher? Well, I thought y'all were Baptists." He said, "Oh, we are." I said, "Well, why didn't you call your own preacher?" And he says, "We didn't want our preacher getting sick." A while back, I was traveling a little bit and down in Florida, and I happened to see a big sign. It said, "Welcome to Kissimmee." And I thought, well, what a neat name for a town. And I heard somebody else happen to say Kissimmee. And I thought, well, I wonder how you pronounce it. Is it Kissimmee or Kissimmee? And I thought, well, I'm going to get a bite to eat, and I'll ask them. So I stopped and got a bite to eat. And I said, "Hello there." I said, "I'm new here, and I'm not real sure how you pronounce the name of this place." I said, "Will you speak slowly and distinctly and tell me the name of this place?" And they said, "Burger King." A while back, I was at the hospital, and I went to see my old friend, Ms. Ledbetter. And I said, "Hello, Ms. Ledbetter." I said, "How are you?" I says, "Do you know who I am?" She looked at me. She said, "No, I don't. But if you go down to the nurse's stand, they will tell you." While I was there, Ms. Ledbetter had a big bowl of peanuts. And I ate one or two and then three or four. And you know how it is eating peanuts. And before I knew it, I had eaten the whole bowl full of peanuts. I said, "Oh, Ms. Ledbetter, I have eaten all your peanuts. I'm so sorry I've eaten every single one of your peanuts." And she said, "Oh, that's okay. Ever since I lost my teeth, all I can do is suck the chocolate off of them." Well, I told a few jokes while I was there in the big community room, and as I was leaving, I was saying goodbye to different people, and I told this one lady, I says, "I hope you get better." And she looked up at me and she says, "I hope you get better too." Well, I've enjoyed being with you, and remember to smile at everybody you see, because you never know who is going to have extra tomatoes in their garden this summer. Take care. Bye-bye.